you check the children?
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you, join me here for a very special return of Hail to Stephen King on the horror show. So recently graduated from Arizona State, so that was over 2 years of going back to school, film and media studies and all that great stuff, but finally finished, and we'll be pursuing a master's here in the fall, but taking the summer off, and just really thought, as I was discussing this with Cecil the other day, I'm still probably going to do like a longer form sort of live review of this book on my own personal channel, you know, but in a brand new Holly Gibney story. Yes, one of many at this particular point, come out this past week, entitled Never Flinch. This is our cover right here, as you can see. Justice, let there be justice. But have to mention the fact that it's another Holly story. So just, I believe it was 2 years ago, we got her self-titled album, their release, so to speak. And even before that, we had the Bill Hodges trilogy, and then we had The Outsider, and then we had If It Bleeds. So this is our 7th Holly release. Aside from, you know, the new quartet in the Dark Tower books, man, she is his go-to as far as the most frequently recurring character in Stephen King fare. And so this is not going to be like one of my insanely long deep dives into this. It is going to be, as I said, non-spoiler. I'm not sure what the future of Hale, if there will maybe be, you know, an episode here or there on the horror show, and then maybe jump back over to stuff here at the Horror Show Studios with me. But we just thought it would be a nice special treat to, you know, return to the scene of the crime before I actually started doing stuff on my own set at home and whatnot. But in the earliest of days, Hail to Stephen King was covering stuff like, you know, It 2017, and we have still always done on this newer set at the horror show, the Stephen King like tier list and updates on that. And so, yeah, it was an executive decision suggestion from the founder of the feast, Cecil, and I thought that it would be fun for me to at least give some spoiler-free and I guess truncated thoughts about impressions of this particular book. And so I gotta say right off the bat that I was underwhelmed, but you know, it's not that I didn't expect to be underwhelmed. That's the problem with this, because of the fact that while, you know, I thought Holly, the previous story with Ms. Gibney, you know, was it was a step up and like superior to this book. You know, I loved the stuff with the older academics, and when you found out what they were actually doing and, you know, pursuing and things of that nature. I'm not really going to spoil any of those older Holly books either, but you know, I just thought that that book was much more streamlined in a lot of ways than this particular book was. And, you know, King even has an afterword in this where he mentions, and I think it's good for me to preface just my brief thoughts on this book with it. So in the afterword, he actually talks about the fact that this book was difficult for him to write, that he had some hip surgery, and he doesn't go into this being a situation where, you know, like after the van accident where he was topped up on painkillers or whatever, but I think maybe, you know, that might have had something to do with it, and the inspiration just not really flowing the way that he would like. But apparently this went through 3 different revisions as far as like just not just title changes, because it was originally called like Always Holly or something like that, and then there was a different title, and then he ends up finally finishing on the Never Flinch title. But it also went through extensive rewrites, and even more so than in the afterword, he was talking with the press before this book came out about the fact that he showed one of the earlier drafts of this to Tabby, his wife, and she was like, yeah, you can do better. This is not so good. And, you know, he got a little frustrated, but he scrapped a ton of it. Apparently, Holly Gibney was going to be like a bodyguard for Lady Gaga, and she had like a dog stolen or something like that, which I guess did happen in real life or something. But he ended up scrapping a lot of story, and he claims in the afterword that eventually he had to just hope that, you know, consulting with his editor and all of the alterations worked, and eventually he had to just let it go because of the fact that he was thinking about just scrapping this book a few times entirely, but he had done so much work on it, and, you know, he believed in certain aspects of it that he did not want to go through with doing that. And, you know, I'm not going to say that I would have been happier if this was not part of the King canon, but I think it does show how, with certain longer form things, that he doesn't necessarily have the adaptability to juggle a bunch of different stories quite as well as he used to, and especially big cast of characters, because there's a number of moving pieces in this book. There's a lot of subplots, and, well, it even says in the description here in the leaflet and everything that, you know, they eventually, you know, coalesce and all come together. They kind of do, but they still don't necessarily, like, meld that very well. I mean, just, I don't know. There's an A plot, there's a B plot, there's a C plot. I'll go into, you know, some of them here in a moment, but, you know, in older stuff where he would have these larger casts of characters in these smaller towns, albeit this one's in the Midwest, not in Maine, but, you know, Needful Things, tons of characters, but, you know, there is enough compelling nature to these little side stories, and they almost like, it was almost like a short story that dwelt within the large novel, and it wrapped up and it was done. Whereas in this, he tries to have all of these different side stories merged together, and at least for me personally, art subjective, as I always say, it didn't work, man. Didn't really work. And, you know, big cast of characters, or if you're thinking about Salem's Lot, or if you're thinking, you know, obviously about The Stand, but, you know, maybe he was just more adept at doing that, or maybe, you know, they just, his old age, I don't know, man. He's going to be 78 this year. I mean, he still has some skill with his prose, and there's amusing bits in this, but it just didn't, once again, tons of subplots in this. So you do have the return of Holly Gibney, and you also have the return of a number of characters from those Hodges books and from The Outsider and whatnot. So Detective Izzy, oh man, I forget her last name. Isabella, it's like Jane or something like that. Anyway, we'll just call her Izzy for all intents and purposes. But she's somebody who replaced Bill Hodges after he retired from the force and became the new partner of Hodges' former partner. And so Izzy really, as opposed to being like a character that pops up just a little bit here or there, this gets to be her book in some ways. But then again, you also have Holly Gibney, who is consulting her on the case of this killer who has gone by the name of Trig, in something that, you know, he sends a message to, you know, law enforcement, as opposed to Hodges. I mean, this is another thing that this book echoes so many other things that King has done, not just recently, you know, in this whole, like, hard-boiled crime phase that he has had, but we're talking all the way back to, like, Insomnia, with the very well-intentioned analysis of anti-abortion people. That was a big plot thread in Insomnia, but that was another book that felt overbloated despite being almost twice in length of this one. This still felt very much because, you know, you have this guy who's like, I'm going to kill, you know, X number of innocents, and then I'm going to kill one guilty person because somebody lost their life that did not deserve to. There was somebody who was framed for a crime, and this person has like just a deep-rooted aggravation. And, you know, the Trig character, without getting too much into them, you know, without spoiling too much there, because the book opens with Trig actually. So that character has warped logic that I just did not completely buy into. You know, I think that innocents should suffer, and that's the thing. Crazy people don't have what seems like reasonable logic, and that is perhaps the argument against my criticism of this character's motivation for what they're doing, killing innocent people, you know, because somebody else innocent was killed. I guess that shows that this person was losing their grip on sanity and everything, but I don't know, the motivation there, I just didn't buy into. But then there is another plot that is kind of like, you know, Trig is the A, and him going around killing people around Buckeye City. That's the A plot. And then the B plot is the fact that there is a woman named Kate who is very similar to this iconic, pro-abortion, pro-women's rights character that you had in Insomnia, who goes around and does these big speaking engagements, and there is an obsessive that is essentially terrorizing her, and I think it was Corey was the name of her lead assistant. And so, Corey has like bleach thrown in her face when they're leaving one of the speaking engagements in Reno. And then, there's further things like just escalating stalking and something that's happening. So you have two different villains associated with two different stories. And the B villain, which I actually, without spoiling things, I figured something out pretty early on about the nature of that character without spoiling stuff. That's one thing that I do really want to talk about in a lengthier live spoiler review with the Hellcats hat. But yeah, I sniffed something out pretty carefully about that, and there is a religious, righteous warrior, this woman Kate, who's going around speaking and pumping everybody up, women power and all that different stuff. This character has a religious slant to them, which is why they are going after her. And but one interesting thing about the way Kate wrote about this, and this is one of the pros of the way King approached this this particular character, is that Kate is not squeaky clean likable. She's actually kind of full of herself. She's got an ego about her. She is a bit insensitive with her assistant Corey. She ends up taking on Holly Gibney as her bodyguard, and that is something that is mentioned in the plot synopsis and stuff. And I gotta say, Holly Gibney is even described in this book as being this little 5'3" woman, and just the odd conveniences of bringing her on, as maybe hear the thunder in the background. It's storming like crazy here in the Deadly Desert, but just the peculiar, almost nonsensical, silly nature of Holly Gibney being a bodyguard. Now, I would think more so if she was coordinating a team of like actual, rough and tumble people. Now, and she's consulted because of the fact that this woman's speaker and blogger and just this social media presence that is the Kate character. She's like, hey, I'm sick of dealing with men and I'm sick of dealing with law enforcement. So that's why. But a private investigator like Holly is still adjacent to law enforcement and works with law enforcement all the time. So just the conveniences of so many different things within this. And so, yeah, Holly going and, initially consulting Izzy with that, and then getting involved with the B plot and, the stalker of this, pro-women's rights speaker, Kate. So that's our B plot. But then you also have the C plot of, I love the characters of Barbara and Jerome, the black siblings that were initially introduced all the way back in Mr. Mercedes, and they have grown as characters, the two Robinson siblings within this. And ironically enough, King decided to make them both writers after a while. Barbara writes poetry, Jerome likes writing nonfiction length like novel sort of stuff. But I don't know, man. There's this whole C plot with Jerome's sister Barbara having an admirer that is this soul singing woman trying to make a comeback in her career named Sister Bessie. And so she read one of her poems and tries to recruit her to her band. So that's the C story. But then you also have even smaller little snippets of these tons of additional people that are trying to sniff out Killer A, the trig person killing the innocents, because they have a connection with AA and with NA. And so Holly Gibney is consulting people within the Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous community, like her friend who is a sober bartender. And so you have all of these even lesser supporting characters that are trying to help out with various aspects of investigation. Does it sound like an overstuffed turkey? Does it sound a little convoluted? Does it sound like there's way too many working pieces that aren't gonna, like, when you have all these gears and like in the old days of like a wristwatch for whatever reason, and like the actual twist watches and stuff, and if one of those cogs just wasn't really turning, it's gonna mess up some of the other stuff. Yeah, that's kind of where this one started to get with me, and especially as it's kind of doing the bounce around. And yes, I did mention earlier that stuff like Salem's Lot and The Stand, and but when you think of something later that was trying to do it, like Under the Dome, it didn't do it as well. And this, unfortunately, does it even worse. So I'm not going to go so far as to say the book is kind of a jumbled mess, but I kind of think it is at times when King decides to focus specifically on one of these subplots. Like, Trig gets a lot more attention than the stalker of the woman's rights speaker, and he does explore some familiar things about why this person would potentially be losing their grip, you know, an abusive father and stuff like that. So the Trig character is significantly more interesting than our B villain, that is the stalker of Kate, the woman's right person. But I gotta say, while I appreciate King's affinity for, you know, soul and, you know, blues and jazz and things of that nature, the stuff with the Sister Bessie character and Barbara seems unnecessary in this. I mean, I used the term overstuffed the turkey a moment ago for a reason, because of the fact that that's kind of what this, you know, kind of starts to feel like. And then there's even another subplot I didn't mention about the fact that there is this upcoming softball competition between the local police force and the local fire department in Buckeye City, and they're calling the annual event, this is where King can still make me laugh with something, they're calling it the Guns and Hoses softball game, you know, and it's all for charity and everything. But there's this huge rivalry D plot that I forgot to mention initially about how the Izzy character is being taken away from the murder investigation she's supposed to be working on, because Lieutenant Lewis, I forget his last name, but, you know, they lose their pitcher, the pitcher for this softball game, and so he knows she played in college, and so her attention is taken away from, you know, the focus of the murder mystery to this softball game, and it's just like, there's too much, man. There's too much, and this is not like a 600, 700, 800 pound monster, you know? This is 430 something pages, man, so it is not even like giving a lot of these subplots, in my estimation, enough time to like really simmer and get particularly interesting. Aside from the Trig stuff is definitely what I feel like is the main focus of it, and just the askew and warped logic of, you know, killing innocents and then one guilty person for the sake of this odd essence of atonement. Excuse me, guys. I'm just trying to make sure that I hit, you know, a lot of the points that I did over the course of this review. But yeah, as I said, while it's, regardless of your political affiliations and stuff, Stephen King is a liberal guy, you know, and he's very outspoken about that. And so regardless of your political affiliations, I respect the fact that he has enough conviction about this cause for women's rights to want to return to it. Even in the afterword, he eulogizes, and this isn't spoiler or anything because it's a well-known part of the plot here, but he does eulogize those who have been killed by anti-abortion protesters since the 90s, which was right around the time when he wrote Insomnia, and this stuff was really, really going hard, you know. And this is where I have to like kind of start to slow this down, because I'm tempted and I'm walking on eggshells not to get into too many spoilers. I already mentioned the fact that Holly as a bodyguard, you know, it just seems utterly silly, and the fact that that was obviously going all the way back to the Gaga and the stolen dog idea, something he really wanted to retain in all of these extensive rewrites before he just finally, you know, decided to just, you know, give up the ghost. You know, there is an interesting personal aspect to this exploration of the AA and the NA stuff, because a lot of people know that Stephen King has been in that camp since the late 80s when he got sober after the Tommyknockers. So that's obviously another cause that really means excuse me, a lot to him. Sorry, the coffee wasn't doing me any favors there, but yeah, that's another cause that definitely means a lot to him. He's referenced it in various different writings over the years, and so I respect him wanting to shed some additional light on that community, some of its quirks and intricacies and nuances and things of that nature. Yep, I already mentioned something that I sniffed out about our B villain, the one that's going after Kate, the woman speaker, you know. And there is most definitely just the little intriguing observation bits, like there's this point where Holly just kind of thinks to herself, women have basements and men have sub-basements, and the fact that, you know, I guess it's because maybe they're the birth givers or whatever. There's a reason why there's far more men that are serial killers than women, despite the fact that there are some very notorious ones. That's obviously him through the voice of the Holly character, just thinking that, yeah, men have been responsible for far more evil and maintain far more like sinister secrets that they do not allow other people, to actually get wind of. But yeah, once again, I mean, I really like Jerome Robinson, who goes all the way back to Bill Hodges and Mr. Mercedes. He's mowing his lawn and all that other stuff. I like the fact that that character is still around, but he just ultimately, it just felt like King wanting to. It's like, okay, I love these characters so much that I just want to bring them back in some capacity. But Jerome has very little to do to this with the proceedings until the third act, and it has so many callbacks within this to stuff that happened in If It Bleeds, stuff that happened in The Outsider, and those are two books that had a crap ton of similarities, unfortunately. But yeah, his presence just seems relatively unnecessary. He doesn't have anywhere near as much to do as his sister until later in the book, and it feels like King trying to, the whole square peg into a circle, hole, or whatever the hell it is, because of the fact that he just wanted them to be there, as opposed to really serving as much of like a necessary purpose to the narrative. And that's just kind of a bummer. And there is a sweetness to like this whole, Sister Bessie singer, and just taking to Barbara almost like as, the daughter that she never had. And there is some insight given to that at one particular point. And, Kate can say interesting things like, the opposite of woke is fast asleep, where, I'm a registered independent. I'm somewhere in between the two dueling extremes that we have just going for each other's jugulars in this. But as a whole, it's so busy. And while I like these characters, I like the character of Holly. I am not like as down on her and King wanting to go back to her as often as he has. But it is getting to the point of excessiveness. And that's actually why I really enjoyed You Like It Darker so much, his collection of short stories, which was his release last year. And I think in some ways, a short story idea, because I loved that book, and just about every story in it, whether the shorter ones or the ones that even felt a little bit like a retread, I liked those shorts, and I think maybe King succeeds a little bit more with shorts now than with like a big full-length novel, because of the fact that he gets one good idea, and he sees it through in a condensed form, and then moves on to something completely different. Whereas in this, he had tons of ideas that he just wanted to jam them all in there. And the fact that he even said that this was rewritten so many times, I can't even remember what some of the early forms of, I can't even imagine what some of the early forms of this could have actually entailed, everybody. All my constant readers and stuff that are potentially checking this out. So, one of my favorite bits, though, was the fact that that King decided to write Kate this, this pro-woman's rights character as being crass and kind of unlikable. I thought that was a bold choice. Now, she still has a lot of redeeming qualities. She's one of the more interesting characters in the book, aside from the slew of returning familiar faces. And I like the Izzy character. I just didn't like the fact that she gets, just kind of sidelined into, pitching for this softball game as opposed to really being as involved in the narrative, because without spoiling things, by the time we come to the third act, just like we had in If It Bleeds, and just like we have in Holly, and just like, in so many of these previous books with Ms. Gibney, we have our characters that have seen these things, and boy, how ironic is that they just keep experiencing the most horrible things over and over and over and over. Yeah, it feels like fiction, because in any essence of the real world, boy, that would be just like lightning striking over and over and over, and the slightest likelihood, I don't know, it's just a bit much, But once again, I do like Jerome and Barbara and Holly, and I grew to enjoy Izzy a little bit more. But a lot of the other characters in this, aside from Kate the newcomer, who was spunky and amusing to me, the way King decided to write her, this is you can't even really be let down when you weren't going in expecting a lot. I didn't go in with the burden of expectation, but I always go in just trying to have the most open mind when it comes to a new King release. But I've said it on Tale over the last X amount of years that I feel like the reason we are seeing much more intriguing possibilities with something like finally adapting The Long Walk, which looks great, by the way, or I'm a little more hesitant on Welcome to Derry, or I don't know, Edgar Wright doing this new version of The Running Man that's coming out this fall. That's the sort of stuff that intrigues me, because it's finally seeing adaptations of, dare I say, older and stronger writing from Cy King. And, you know, that's the great thing about art, though. As I said, it's subjective, as I can't really go any further without spoiling things. So I just want to extend a grande gracias for those who are tuning into this. But the last thing that I wanted to do here is a shout out to Cemetery Dance, because of the fact that, boy, did they take a while doing things as far as getting books released. You know, but I love just the passion that Chismar has for not just King, but, you know, doing these deluxe editions. I finally got, after pre-ordering it a couple years ago, and this is what I'm going to end the video with, everybody, finally got the second to last of the double-day years that Cemetery Dance has been putting out. There's one more to go with Pet Cemetery, which has already been on pre-order for quite a while. But this is the long-awaited version of, let's get it out of the bubble wrap real quick. I have taken too much of Cecil's time up here. But yeah, everybody, check out that son bitch, The Stand. And I'm not going to go too into this, but let's take it out of the slipcase. Let's get a look at this awesome artwork with Mother Abigail on the front. Yeah, man. Really, really great stuff with, you know, her in Hemingford home. I'm trying to remember who is actually responsible for some of the art in this, but that is one of the things that... Now, yeah, so check this out. I believe it is Glenn Chadbourne doing it, but yeah, get some trash can man action there, pulling the nuker. Interesting how they would have that right at the very beginning, but I would imagine if you're somebody who pre-ordered this a long, long time back, you're familiar with the story. Let's actually, and this is in my unholy trinity of King stuff. You know, I always have said for years on this channel, it's The Stand, it's it. Yep, there we are in Arnett. It's The Stand, it's it, and it's Pet Cemetery. Those are his three greatest works, at least in my estimation. Let's get to another color image real quick. But yeah, this is, I believe, the uncut version. So it is a beast of a release. Let's find something else. I guess there's another color image that we have right here. Let's check this shizzle out. Yeah. Now, I'm trying to think if that would be the biker dude who messes with Trash Can Man at one particular point in the book. You know, that's the unfortunate thing about these super deluxe releases is I try to be like as ginger with all of it as possible, and it's like you have your collectible copies, and then you have your reader copies. We've got a little more Mother Abigail going here, which is good stuff. I do like, they almost look like oil paintings that they've got here. Here's another one with a little confrontation between her and Flag. Looking at this stuff does make me bittersweet for, like, you know, when King was firing on all cylinders earlier in his career, and unfortunately that's when he was on the sauce, guys. So that's that is definitely something to keep in mind. I'm trying to find at least one more illustration to show you guys. Yeah, so this funeral sequence there, presumably. I'm guessing that would be the Mother Abigail funeral, maybe, but I'm not 100%. This is one that I have been wanting to revisit. I've read The Stand a number of times, both the original version, the 80s paperback, and the uncut. And this is a cool one as well. I believe that's going to be a bunch of peeps in Boulder, contrast with some of the Vegas fools, you know. But this is one that I have most definitely been wanting to revisit for a while, because of the fact that later this year, I believe it's coming out in August. Yep, and then we've got when they're on the journey, that I'm guessing is Stu, and he is chilling. They made him look a little bit younger than I would have thought. Yeah, that's where he gets left behind before Tom Cullen finds him and everything. But this is one that, so I will not belabor you guys with too much more here, but hell of a release. I'm so very excited to finally have it, nearly have the double-day years completed. But in August, we have the release of a collection of short stories entitled "The End of the World as We Know It." Yep, in reference to the REM song, which I believe they play in the Stan Mick Garris miniseries. But the less we say about the CBS one, the better. But so that's coming out in late August, and it's a bunch of different authors like Joe R. Lansdale. I'm trying to remember some of the others, but inconsequential. Each of them are tackling different stories in the Stan universe, you know, and this is all approved by King. He has a foreword coming for it, and, you know, it's going to be at the beginning of the book and stuff. But that's one of the more exciting releases this year because it's him allowing other people to get in the sandbox and play around and all that different stuff, and the fact that, you know, he approved, signed off on all of the different authors for this. And so yeah, I'm not sure if they're going to tackle maybe some stories about, hey, what happened with Captain Trips on like the other side of the world, somewhere in like Europe or Asia or, you know, South America maybe, something of that nature, almost like what they tried to do with The Walking Dead, going overseas, you know, with what's his face, with Daryl and things of that nature. So yeah, I was even going into reading Never Flinch a lot more excited about that thing that King approved, as opposed to, or as I said, you know, The Long Walk and The Running Man, these other King projects that are King adjacent stuff, either adapting his work or just riffing, on some of the subject matter, you know, that at this point, and of course Joe Hill's King Sorrow, those are the things that I am super stoked about, you know, and I was definitely a lot more excited about those things, you know, getting this special edition finally, you know, reading The End of the World as We Know It, you know, or, you know, King Sorrow, his son Joe's new book that comes out in October. Those are things that I found myself a little more excited about, but hey, I still love El Rey. He is still my guy, and now with school being done, at least for the time being, I'm most definitely going to be doing some other Hale videos on a different subject matter. Most notably, I am doing a Holly Gibney story countdown, so that will be coming, I'd say, in the next like week or two, along with a spoiler live discussion about this at some point. Maybe I'll give some other people, you know, because this book was a little bit of a slog for me to get through. Was Never Flinch. So yeah, guys, maybe I'll give some of the Hale Quartet and some of the other viewers here on the Horror Show and in Fuego-tainment a bit more time to check things out. But yeah, I, along with the other reviews that I did, have been up here for an hour and a half, and there's many other things that need to be filmed with the rest of the collective today. So I want to extend a grande gracias, obviously, to everybody who tuned into this first Hale in, I think, again, over 2.5 years here on the Horror Show. So extremely excited for anybody who checked this out on the old stomping grounds. I've been Jaime Fuego. You can find me on all the socials, you know, the Twitter X and, you know, Facebook, Insta, you know, Threads, all of them. You know, I'm on all of them, although I'm not on all of them that often. The disillusionment of social media has kind of hit me hard since going back to school and everything. But yeah, guys, that is going to be the end of things. And so once again, that was my thoughts on Never Flinch, the newest from Cy King. Disappointing, unfortunately, but not that disappointing because, you know, I tried to go in with tempered expectations. But yeah, y'all, until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, sin amigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you. I have hoping that we have been well, my boy, I can't even remember the mantra, and I'm hoping we share more of this palaver sooner rather than later. And until then, remember, stay scared and read Stephen King. Although when it comes down to it, I would say you're probably better off with The Stand if you can stomach something of this size.